Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Awesome. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Anne Free Engel. I'm the Deputy Director of Revolutionary Spaces, and we're thrilled to welcome you to tonight's program, All the Voices in the House, Hear My Plea and Know My Truth. For the first time, the eloquent petitions of disenfranchised people seeking their rights in the 17th and 18th centuries will be read and reinterpreted by some of Boston's best spoken word artists on the very balcony I'm standing on, which is where the Declaration of Independence was first read in 1776. If you're not familiar with Revolutionary Spaces, our mission is to bring people together to explore the nation's unfinished struggle to create and sustain a free society, as evoked by the histories of the two buildings we care for, the old State House, which is where we're located right now, and the old South Meeting House, which is just down a couple blocks on Washington Street. The old State House was built in 1713, and it's had a lot of political lives over time. First as the center of colonial government in Massachusetts, then as the home of the Massachusetts state legislature after independence, and then also as the home of the government for the city of Boston. We and our many Rev Spaces members are incredibly honored to care for these two National Historic Landmark sites that anchor Boston's Freedom Trail and are also a vital part of Boston's National Historical Park. As an organization, we're committed to creating experiences like tonight's that draw on the power of history and these spaces to deepen our understanding of the past, provide a fresh perspective on the world we live in today, and also help us build a better future. Before we officially begin the program, I just would like to briefly acknowledge on behalf of Revolutionary Spaces that the sites we care for, the old State House and the old South Meeting House, stand on the occupied, still unceded homeland of the Massachusetts people. We honor and respect the many Native nations who are connected to these sites, past, present, and future, including the Nipmuc, Wampanoag, and Massachusetts people. Revolutionary Spaces supports our Native neighbors and is committed to understanding and dismantling the destructive legacies of settler colonialism that are embodied in the history of our buildings. We do hope that tonight's event, All the Voices in the House, will help reignite your interest in participating in civic life by remembering how we stand on the shoulders of so many prior generations who took civic leaps and raised their voices even as they faced what seemed like long and daunting odds. While the vast majority of people living in Massachusetts in the 17th and 18th centuries lacked the right to vote, many bravely did use their right to petition the government for change. By acting on the belief that their voices mattered, they helped lay the groundwork for the privileges we have today. Revolutionary Spaces is deeply grateful for the support of the Lowell Institute and the National Park Service, which makes this event possible. So I'm thrilled right now to welcome some of Boston's most dynamic spoken word artists who will read and reinterpret a set of petitions from people of varying backgrounds during this time period at the Old State House. I'm going to give a very brief bio for each of these incredible people. Folks are handing out full programs, and you'll see a full bio in there for each of them. We have tonight with us Amanda Shea, a two-time Boston Music Award-winning spoken word artist. She is a performer, educator, archivist, publicist, host, and creator. Anita D. is a spoken word artist from Brockton, Massachusetts. Formerly a slam competitor, Anita has been on the House Slam team of Boston and a finalist in both the National Poetry Slam and the Individual World Poetry Slam. Dee Ruff is a Roxbury-bred spoken word poet, creative director of Boston Pulse Poetry Program, and has been the co-host of the If You Can Feel It, You Can Speak It open mic movement. And Safari, who brought us in today with his performance, is a Roxbury native whose talents transcend categorization. He's garnered nominations at the Boston Music Awards and captivated at Boston Calling. Last but not least, we want to thank Daniel Carpenter from Harvard's Government Department in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences for his help selecting this program. If you enjoyed tonight's event and you want to support our work here at Revolutionary Spaces, I hope you'll consider becoming a member and making a gift in any amount that's meaningful for you. Please feel free to talk to one of our staff. Ben is out there. Ben, raise your hand if you're interested in learning more. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our amazing performers. Thank you very much.
The humble petition of Elizabeth Proctor, that in the year of our Lord, 1692, when many persons in Salem and other towns thereabout were accused by some evil disposed or strangely influenced persons as being witches, or for being guilty of acting witchcraft, my husband, John Proctor, and myself were accused of such, and we both, my husband and myself, were so far proceeded against that we were condemned. But in that sad time of darkness, before my said husband was executed, it is evident somebody had contrived a will and brought it to him to sign, wherein his whole estate is disposed of, not having regard to a contract in writing made with me before marriage with him. But so it pleased God to order by his province that although the sentence was executed on my dear husband, that although this sentence was made on my dear husband, yet through God's greatness to your petitioner, I am yet alive. Since my husband's death, the will is proved and approved by the judge of probate, and by that kind of disposal, the whole judge estate is disposed of. And although God hath granted my life, yet those that claim my husband's estate by that which thy call a will not suffer me to have one penny of his estate, neither of any before marriage, account of the dowry which as humbly conceived doth belong or oath to belong to me by the law, for they say that I am dead in the law. Therefore my humble request and petition to this honored general court is that by an act of his honored court, as God hath continued my life through God's goodness, without fear of being put to death upon that sentence, you would be pleased to put me in a capacity to make use of the law to recover that which of right by law I ought to have my necessary supply, and support that as your petitioner and my one of his majesty's subject, I may have the benefit of his laws. So humbly praying that God would direct your honors in all things to thou, that which may be well pleasing to him, I subscribe your honor's humble petitioner, Elizabeth Proctor, 1696. Draped in chains like the finest threads, who knew the cufflinks I picked out would soon turn into handcuffs, linked to accusations of witchcraft, sorcery, and evil, evidence of my own guilt of wanting to be cuffed. You single-handedly rearranged the letters and removed vowels from my last name. Bearing your name, I'm the beneficiary. Without benefits, I don't feel privileged here anymore. Black arts and black magic. Indicted for black magic, this off-white dress is now my new uniform. Happy wife, happy life. Who coined that mantra? Probably a man who'd use it as justification for my family's dowry, property of marriage law, our families cloaked in wealth. Me, choked up on salty tears, stained in soot, under the sky, painfully dark and motionless except for the faint light from the moon. Everything seems lifeless. My comforter now forms a blanket of insecurity. Vows are like broken promises. My right of habit is to recover the estate of my late husband, seemingly seeking charity that is not governed, acknowledging the authority, the general court or king have my testament, his will, rewritten to keep my will to survive, shattered into pieces similar to the ashes that lay at his feet from his own demise, now barefoot and pregnant, granted permission to live, my body, no longer a sentence to be a gravesite glowing, expecting converture, not a separate legal entity other than my deceased love, yet carrying with his child together in despair, vulnerable. I plead to the courts, begging for good fortune, the price of an accusation. What's the amount? My unborn child Calculate our grief to not be left in darkness and destitute. This ring-shaped pattern of allegations matches my husband's burial grounds. Our sacred lineage is now desecrated, sparing my life while depraving me of my husband's spare change. This address today is to state I am entitled to his entire estate. I ask you all, was I truly spared after all?
Boston, April 20th, 1773. Sir, the efforts made by the legislative of this province in their last sessions to free themselves from slavery gave us, who are in that deplorable state, a high degree of satisfaction. We expect great things from men who have made such a noble stand against the designs of their fellow men to enslave them. We cannot but wish and hope, sir, that you will have the same grand object, we mean civil and religious liberty, in view of your next session. The divine spirit of freedom seems to fire every human breast on this continent except such as are bribed to assist in executing the execrable plan. We are very sensible that it would be highly detrimental to our present matters if we were allowed to demand all that of right belongs to us for past services. This we disclaim. Even the Spaniards, who have not those sublime ideas of freedom that Englishmen have, are conscious that they have no right to all the services of their fellow men. We mean the Africans, whom they have purchased with their money. Therefore, they allow them 1 day a week to work for themselves, to enable them to earn money to purchase the residue of their time, which they have a right to demand in such portions as they are able to pay for a due appraisement of their services being first made, which always stands at the purchase money. We do not pretend to dictate to you, sir, or to the honorable assembly of which you are a member. We acknowledge our obligations to you for what you have already done. But as the people of the province seem to actuate by the principles of equity and justice, we cannot but expect your house will again take our deplorable case into serious consideration and give us the ample relief which, as men, we have a natural right to. But since the wise and righteous governor of the universe has permitted our fellow men to make us slaves, we bow in submission to him and determine to behave in such a manner as that we may have reason to expect the divine probation of and assistance in our peaceful and lawful attempts to gain our freedom. We are willing to submit to such regulations and laws as may be made relative to us until we leave the province, which we determine to do as soon as we can from our joint labors, procure money to transport ourselves to some part of the coast of Africa where we propose a settlement. We are very desirous that you should have instructions relative to us from your town. Therefore, we pray you to communicate this letter to them and ask this favor for us in behalf of our fellow slaves in this province, and by order of their committee: Peter Best, Sambo Freeman, Felix Holbrook, Chester Joey. The efforts made by the white legislative of this great city to protest against their chains to free themselves from the royals across the water gave us black folk who were still receiving the end of the lashings a high degree of satisfaction. Because then and now we can expect this, we can expect great things to manifest from the same people who have made such a stand against their fellow man whose taxes enslave them. We wish and hoped, sir, that y'all will have that same energy for civil and righteous liberty to us the next time that y'all meet the courts. The word and spirit of freedom seems to set an inferno in the hearts of every white human breast, and it spreads like wildfire across this nation, except for us, slaves, who have had to ask you multiple times based on the circumstances. We understood that it would be a huge mistake for us, for one of us, to bring our issues to the court ourselves as slaves, even if we were allowed to demand all the rights that belong to us for the things that we've done for your homes. The Spanish, whom you believed don't even possess the same level of intelligence you Englishmen have, knew that they have no right to all the services from us, even though they still purchased us with their money, so in attempts to imitate you. So have them work one day a week for themselves to collect their money back for the time they spent, which they have more of a right to demand than us. We won't pretend to be ignorant to you, sir, and the assembly. We acknowledge what we had to pay in blood, sweat, and tears to you for what you've done. But now, you and your people seem to have been standing behind your own principles of equality and justice. So of course, we would expect this House will again and finally take our enslavement into serious consideration and give us some help and relief, which we have a natural right to. But since the wise and righteous governor of the universe, the one that we have to call Massa, the white fellow that fought alongside you for your freedom, has permitted us slaves, we bow in submission to him and bite our tongues and pay this price as long as we can expect some assistance in our peaceful attempts to break these chains. We had no choice but to submit to such regulations and laws as it would be detrimental for us until we leave the city, which we are determined to do as soon as we can, get our money from our slave laborers and gather and transport ourselves to some part of Africa where we propose to settle away from y'all. We yearn for the day that you would have some instructions for us from your town. Therefore, we pray that you slide this letter to them and ask this favor for the slaves.
The petition of Paul Cuffey, March 14th, 1780. The petition of several poor Negroes and mulattoes who are inhabitants of the town of Dartmouth, humbly showeth that we, being chiefly of the African extract, and by reason of long bondage and hard slavery, we have been deprived of enjoying the profits of our labor, or the advantage of inheriting estates from our parents, as our neighbors, the white people, do. Having some of us not long enjoyed our own freedom, yet of late, contrary to the invariable custom and practice of the country, we have been, and now are, taxed both in our polls and the small pittance of estate, which through much hard labor and industry, we have got together to sustain ourselves, and families withal. We apprehend it, therefore, to be hard usage, and will doubtless, if continued, reduce us to a state of beggary, whereby we shall become a burthen to others, if timely not prevented by the interposition of your justice and your power. Your petitioners further show that we apprehend ourselves to be aggrieved, and that while we are not allowed the privilege of freemen of the state, having no vote or influence in the election of those that tax us, yet many of our color, as is well known, have cheerfully entered the field of battle in the deference of the common cause, and that against a similar exertion of power, too well known to need a recital in this place, we most humbly request, therefore, that you would take our unhappy case into your serious consideration, and that your wisdom and power grant us relief from taxation while under our present depressed circumstances, and our poor petitioners, as in duty bound, shall ever pray. Dated at Dartmouth, the 10th of February, 1780. We the people, after the petition of Paul Cuffey. We, the Black and mixed families of Dartmouth, whose lineage runs deep in the veins of this land, who many have been enslaved, beaten, assaulted, bound to trauma by the faces that mirror our neighbors, we, the people, who have long been deprived the fruits of our labor, the people whose ancestors could never pass down lands or homes, the people whom this government continues to attack, whom this government continues to tax and take from, how much more can we give to prove we are as human as you? Our lives, the ones yet not taken, have cheerfully battled side by side with white men who still think of us as less than. Our money, our possessions, what little we do have, not even a voice we are given, not in the matter of who taxes us. So we are choosing to speak up, here and now, loud and clear. Let us be heard, and let it be known. Your greed, shall it continue to grow, will undoubtedly reduce us to a fate of beggary, and yet, even in our poorest of states, our Black be resilient, be bound tighter to love and God than it ever was to hatred. Our Black be holy, be sacred, be a prayer. Thank you.
Petition of the Mashpee Nation, 1783. To the Honorable, the Senate and House of Representatives and General Court assembled. The inhabitants of color of the District of Mashpee beg leave to offer with the utmost deference and respect the following observations to the consideration of the Honorable Legislature. Ever since this settlement of this country, the Aboriginals, and those who claimed under them have been deemed the legal proprietors of the territory comprised within said district, the same having never been transferred or conceded to the whites. The government of the late province of Massachusetts Bay, notwithstanding, assumed the right of controlling in a particular manner the property and economy of said district, and imposed restraints on the inhabitants, whichever considered by them as an infringement of that freedom to which as men they were justly entitled. At the commencement of the late revolution, when a high sense of civil liberty and the oppressive policy of an arbitrary court roused the citizens of America to noble and patriotic exertions in defense of their freedom, we anticipated the time when a liberal and enlightened spirit of philanthropy should extend its views and its influence to the increase of liberty and social happiness among all ranks and classes of mankind. We supposed a just estimate of the rights of man would teach them the value of those privileges of which we were deprived, and that their own sufferings would naturally lead them to respect and relive ours. Impressed with these sentiments, animated by a portion of that ardent sense of freedom and love of independence which characterized our ancestors, we voluntarily entered the encrimsoned fields of battle and freely mingled our blood with that of our early martyrs to the cause of this country. The sentiments and anticipations which enamored us to the conflict, which were further confirmed by the august and magnanimous Declaration of American Independence, which appalled a British ministry and astonished all Europe. In this, these truths are solemnly stated as self-evident that all men were created equal, that they were endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The adoption of the Constitution of this Commonwealth was still farther confirmation of our hopes. The first article in the Bill of Rights, which declares that all men are free and equal and have certain natural and essential and unalienable rights, amongst which may not be reckoned the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberties, that of acquiring and possessing and protecting our property in line, that of seeking and obtaining their safety and happiness, we expected would be in the future be the broad basis of freedom to all the inhabitants of the Commonwealth. At the close of a long and successful war in which we had been honorably distinguished and had profusely bled, how are we disappointed? How are our pleasing anticipations blasted? How could we conceive it possible to a people who were exhibiting such illustrious proofs of their attachment to freedom and so enlarged ideas of the principles of civil liberty and of the original design of government, should not respect the rights in others which they so warmly contended for themselves? Let's the act of previous and subsequent to the late revolution respecting the Marshby tribe be compared together, and how humiliating a comparison results. By the former, we had the miserable privilege of choosing our own masters. By the latter, even that is taken away. Strange that under hereditary monarch, we should enjoy more liberty than when connected with a republican government. Instead of one master, we have now as many as there are free inhabitants in the Commonwealth, who by their own representatives can make what laws for us they please. We cannot alienate a single inch of our land, nor indeed enjoy it, as the government have undertaken to modify. And they think we are legally incapable of making any contract to the amount of filing without the approbation of our guardians, and in the choice of these we have not the privilege of allowed by law to white infants of 14 years of age. We can institute no action in our own names for the recovery of our own demands. We are governed by laws enacted by legislature where we have no representation. In fact, we are completely slaves. It is a fact. which we can be easily authenticated that one half of the inhabitants of Marshpee fell honorable victims to the cause of liberty. Any considerable figure in life, indeed, we venture to affirm that no adequate means have yet been adopted for the civilization and improvement of the aboriginals of America. They have ever been taught by those who pretended a wish for their improvement that they regarded them as beings of inferior class to that of their more polished neighbors, as designed merely to complete the nice graduation from the most brute creation to intelligent man. If this has not been the language of their theory, it certainly has been of their practice. The progress of civilization among the Aboriginals have been very little beneficial to the subjects of it or conducive to their happiness. We are only taught enough to see and to deplore our forlorn conditions. We have lost that independence of character and sentiment, that high sense of personal liberty, that happy equality, and that simplicity of manners which distinguishes rude tribes without acquiring the privilege of civilized societies. Rob a man of his liberty, and you destroy the best part of his nature. Give us an opportunity to dilate and extend our views in the occupations and pursuit of social life, in the projects of ambition, in the acquisition of wealth. Our minds, with rational science, teach us by bestowing some marks of regard on us to respect ourselves. Let us enjoy some portion of civil liberty. And we believe that we should act no inglorious part on the theater of action. Even as difficult as we are at present, we flatter ourselves that we are not useless members of the community. Petition of the Mashpee Nation, 1783. In the 1700s, Mashpee Nation was seeking fulfillment of the promises of the American Revolution: life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. They suited up and abandoned their land at the request of the nation. Fight, and then you will reap all the awards. 1783 to 2024, what freedoms are we asking for? Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? We sow in seeds that we planted centuries ago, yet taken away slowly. After all the evolution we've done as a people, are we the new slaves? Petitions to protest. We still fighting a country that does not represent us. Wonder why the energy is giving resentment and resistance. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Boston Massacre, opening fire at peaceful protesters, tears well in the eyes of children witnessing bombs of tear gas. Did you know the use increased since the Black Lives Matter movement? July 4th, colonists declared we are created equal. Again, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 1776, what freedoms? We declared Juneteenth. Women, men without property, and slaves are not entitled to these alienable rights. We created this foundation. They blame it on the aliens endowed by our Creator. Then why do men play God? Is it in order to take away our God-given rights? Who gave you all the authority? Must have been the king, gesturing us to battle other civilians, to then be called uncivilized. The injustices is not just us. It's BIPOC. It's now other. And don't we obey? We lay the groundwork for generations to come to be tamed in taxation, property tax, deemed for sale, taxation without representation. Wasn't that a chant? And how we yell and scream till our lungs collapse in the name of freedom when the bell tolls? It's not loud enough. The frequencies of change travel slow and unsuccessful when we winding back the clock on law and ownership. When will the revolution be televised? We locked in times of desperation, begging for the same societal ills since before the 70s. We walked in silence, we chanted, we cried, we burned bras, and still we march, and still we march. Women's suffrage, 1913. Montgomery bus boycott, 1955. Civil rights movement, 1963. March on Washington for jobs, 1963. Selma civil rights, 1965. March on the Pentagon for Vietnam, 1967. Stonewall Rising, 1969. March for Life, Roe versus Wade, 1973. National March for Gay and Lesbian Rights, 1979. Reproductive Rights, 1989. Million Man March, 1995. Trans Rights, 2004. Ferguson Unrest, 2015. Black Lives Matter, 2020. Trans Resistance, 2020. Palestine, 2024. And we still march.
Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to the Honorable, the Senate, and House of Representatives, and the General Court assembled. The petition of Belinda, an African, humbly shows that 70 years have rolled away since she, on the banks of the Rio de Volta, received her existence. The mountains covered with spicy forests, the valleys loaded with the richest fruits spontaneously produced, joined to that happy temperature of air to exclude excess, would have yielded her the most complete felicity, had not her mind received early impressions of the cruelty of men, whose faces were like the moon, and whose bows and arrows were like the thunder and lightning of the clouds. The idea of these, the most dreadful of all enemies, filled her infant slumbers with horror, and her noontime moments with evil apprehensions. But her affrighted imagination, in its most alarming extension, never represented distress equal to what she hath since really experienced. For before, she had 12 years enjoyed the fragrance of her native grooves, and ere she realized that Europeans placed their happiness in the yellow dust, which she carelessly marked with her infant footsteps. Even when she, in a sacred groove, with each hand in that of a tender parent, was paying her devotions to the great Orissa, who made all things, an armed band of white men, driving many of her countrymen in chains, ran into the hollowed shade. Could the tears, the sighs, and supplications bursting from tortured parental affection have blunted the keen edge of avarice, she might have been rescued from agony, which many of her country's children have felt, but which none hath ever described. In vain, she lifted her supplicating voice to an insulted father and her guiltless hands to a dishonored deity. She was ravished from the bosom of her country, from the arms of her friends, while the advanced age of her parents, rendering them unfit for servitude, cruelly separated her from them forever. Scenes which her imagination have never conceived of, a floating world, the sporting monsters of the deep, and the familiar meetings of the billows and clouds, strove but in vain to divert melancholy attention from 300 Africans in chains, suffering the most excruciating torments, and some of them rejoicing that the pangs of death came like a balm to their wounds. Once more her eyes were blessed with a continent, but alas, how unlike the land where she received her being. Here, all things appeared unpropitious. She learned to catch the ideas marked by sounds of language only to know that her doom was slavery, from which death alone was to emancipate her. What did it avail her? That the walls of her Lord were hung with splendor, and that the dust trodden underfoot in her native country crowded his gates with sordid worshipers. The laws had rendered her incapable of receiving property, and though she was a free moral agent, accountable for her actions, yet she never had a moment at her own disposal. 50 years, her faithful hands have been compelled to ignoble servitude for the benefit of an Isaac Royale, until, if nations be agitated and the world convulsed from the preservation of that freedom which her Almighty Father intended for the human race, the present war was commenced. The terror of men armed in the cause of freedom compelled her master to fly and to breathe away his life in a land where lawless domination sits enthroned, pouring bloody outrage and cruelty on all those who dare to be free. The face of your petitioner is now marked with the furrows of time, and her frame feebly bending under the oppression of years, while she, by the laws of the land, is denied enjoyment of one morsel of that immense wealth, a part whereof hath been accumulated by her own industry, and whole augmented by her servitude. Wherefore, casting herself at the feet of your honors, as to a body of men formed for the extirpation of vassalage, for the reward of virtue and the just return of honest industry, she prays that such allowance may be made her out of the estate of Colonel Royale, as will prevent her and her more infirm daughter from misery in the greatest extreme, and scatter comfort over the short and downward path of their lives. And she will ever pray. Boston, the 14th of February, 1783, the mark of Belinda. In the voice of Belinda Sutton, I'll always remember the beauty of my home, on the brim of the Volta River, encompassed by mountains blooming in luscious forests, and valleys spontaneously birthing fruits of the richest nature. The air carried a sort of joy in the breeze, but it's been so long since I've felt Ghana's warmth. I was only 12, 12, when I first learned how truly cruel man can be, whose faces all look like yours, whose bows and arrows shot through crowds of my people like lightning in a storm. My youthful slumbers became haunted with these images, and even still, with all the horror I had witnessed, I never imagined the terrors that were to come. On the day I was taken, I was hand in hand with my parents. Had I known that would have been the last time, maybe I would have held on tighter. We were in a sacred groove, giving worship to the great Orisa who made all things, and suddenly, a wave of white men appeared on the shores armed with hatred and greed. I watched as many of my countrymen were being bound by chains. I listened as the sorrows of mothers and fathers begging and praying for their children back rung across the valleys over deaf ears. I was taken upon a floating world, saw the sporting monsters of the deep for the first time, but was often met with the familiar sounds of lightning striking down upon us. I witnessed hundreds of Africans endure excruciating torment, watched as many rejoiced at the nearing of their demise, for this was their only relief. And when we finally arrived to this land, nothing looked like hope. I began dissecting the sounds of their tongue, only to learn my fate was slavery, and my only escape from this life would be death. 50 years a slave I was. 50 years of ignoble servitude to one Isaac Royale, until one day the world convulsed. A war commenced, and the preservation of freedom which the Almighty Father intended for every human, no matter their shade, and in almost a poetic fashion, armed men appeared again. Only this time, they weaponized the cause of freedom. This time, I was saved, not enslaved. This time, the white man got back on his floating world alone, traveled the seas, and battled the sporting beasts all the way back to where he came from, where lawless domination sit upon a throne, where they spill blood of anyone who dares to be free, and he breathed the rest of his days safe and in comfort and in his home. I stand before you today, 70 years of age, feeble and furrowed with time and trauma, a staggered physique, weighed down by years of oppression. My daughter and I have long been denied restitution, have long suffered and struggled, while Colonel Royale maintained the wealthy estate that was built off of my back and with my faithful hands. And so I come to you today with a prayer that I may be granted the reward of virtue and the return of honest industry I have justly earned. I ask this allowance be promptly withdrawn from the estate of Colonel Isaac Royale. I pray that with this allowance, my daughter and I will be spared from any more misery in this lifetime, and instead be granted comfort and relief in the final years of our lives. And I will ever pray. Thank you.
To the Honorable Senate and the House of Representatives in General Court assembled at their next session, a petition of the subscribers humbly sheathed that in the time of the late war, being desirous to defend, secure, and promote the rights and liberties of the people, we spared no pains, but freely granted all the aid and assistance of every kind that our civil fathers required of us. We are sensible also that a great debt is justly brought upon us by the war, and are willing to pay our shares towards it, as we are to enjoy our shares in independency and constitutional privileges in the Commonwealth, if it was in our power. And we believe that if prudent measures were taken and a moderate quantity of medium to circulate so that our property might sell for the real value, we might in proper time pay said debt. But with the greatest submission, we beg leave to inform your honors that unless something takes place more favorable to the people, in a little time at least, 1/2 of our inhabitants, in our opinion, will become bankrupt. How can it be otherwise? The constables that are daily vandering our property, both real and personal, our land after it is prized by the best judges under oath, is sold for about 1/3 of the value of it. Our cattle, about 1/2 the value. The best English hay, 13 shillings a tone. Interval hay at 6 shillings a tone, and other things at the same rate. And we beg, leave further to inform your honors that suites at law are very numerous, and the attorneys, in our opinion, are very extravagant and oppressive in their demands. And when we compute the taxes laid upon us the 5 preceding years, the state and the county, town and class taxes, the amount is equal to what our farms will rent for. Sirs, is this the situation what we have to live on? No money to be had, our estates daily posted and sold as above described. We can, your honors, ask of us, unless a paper currency or some other medium be provided so that we may pay our taxes and debts. Surely, your honors, are not strangers to the distresses of the people, but do know that many of our good inhabitants are now confined in gall and debt and for taxes. Many have fled, others wishing to flee to the state of New York and other states. And we believe that for 2 past 4 inhabitants have removed from this state to some other state, to that has come from some other state to settle in this state. Honored sirs, are not these imprisonments and fleeing away of our good inhabitants very injurious to the credit or honor of the commonwealth? Will not the people in neighboring states say of this state, although Massachusetts boasts of their fine constitutions, their government is such that it devours their inhabitants. Withstanding all these distresses, we hear of no abatement of salary, but His Excellency, the governor, must be paid $1,100 a year out of the monies collected as before mentioned, and other salaries and grants to other gentlemen, as your honors very well know. If these things are honest, just, and right, we surely wish to be convinced of it. But we honestly confess it is beyond our skill to reconcile these salaries and grants with the principles of our Constitution, viz. Piety, justice, moderation, temperance, etc. We observe in the proclamation lately set out by Our Excellency that the promotion of piety and virtue is highly recommended. We rejoice at that recommendation and beg leave to mention that maximum example is stronger than precepts. And who can be more likely to bring forward a reformation of, by example, than the honorable members of the court, by a line of conduct agreeable to Scripture and the precepts of the Constitution. If your honors find anything above mentioned worthy of notice, we earnestly pray that they may be candidly considered. For we have weighed, hoped, and expected that the present General Court would point out some way whereby the people might be relieved. We therefore most humbly pray your honors to admit a paper currency and make it a tender in all payments whatsoever, or some other way to relieve your petitioners, as your honors in your great wisdom shall think most prosper. And if no other can be found out, pray send us such a committee as your honors can confine in to apprise our estates and take them at your own price, as in duty bound shall every pray. When the British showed up on our doorstep and you declared war in order to defend, secure, promote the rights and liberties of the people, we didn't object and freely granted all kinds of aid and assistance that you asked of us. We understood the debt is a byproduct of the war, and the people of Greenwich were prepared to pay our shares towards it. I mean, we are enjoying our independence and our constitutional privileges in the Commonwealth, and we believed that if the right measures were taken and reasonable amount of funds were circulated, we could sell our property at a great value and we could pay off this debt quickly. But alas, we have to submit and inform your honors that unless circumstances turn themselves into something more favorable for us quickly, half of the people will file for bankruptcy. How? Could it be because the police that wander around our homes daily like livestock could have dropped our property's value? The cost of our land that was praised by the best judges under God is now sold for about 1/3 its value. Our cattle, the best English and interval hay and other things at the same rate. And that's not all, Your Honor. The attorneys are hovering storm clouds, in our opinion, very oppressive with their demands, because we did the math, and the taxes that you gave us 5 years after the war, the state, the county, the town, and the class taxes are about equal to what our farms would have rented for before with the British. Sir, in this situation, how do you expect us to live? Like slaves? In poverty? With no money to be had? Our estates posted and sold for pennies on the dollar? How do you expect us to pay this tab? With the air that we breathe and good faith? Because we can't unless you create another currency or some form of money to be provided so we may pay our taxes and debts. Surely, you haven't distanced yourselves from our distresses and can't hear our cries. You do know that many of your own are now confined in debt and taxes, so the people either fled or wishing to flee to New York and other states, and we believe that for the past 2 years, we've lost more people than we've gained. Honorable sirs, are these the ways you want to be remembered? Is this not a blemish on the reputation of the Commonwealth? You know the other states will talk about you, whispering, hey, although Massachusetts boasts and pokes its constitutional chest out for all to observe and admire, their government drinks at a pub and devours their population with its tab. Not only that, we hear they have no solutions, but their excellency, his governor, is paid handsomely with the taxes and the debt, and the others' grants must go to the other gentlemen. If this is what you consider just and right, we just want a chance to be convinced, but honestly, to be transparent, this is beyond our skill to reconcile. We notice, though, His Excellency declared the practices of virtue have been highly recommended. We love that and have something to add. An example is stronger than an idea. And who can be more fitting to be the example than the honorable members of this general court, those closest to the Lord, by percepts of the Constitution. If the House finds any part of our pain worthy of an audience, we pray that it happens, for we've waited, hoped, and expected for some form of relief, a paper currency made a tender for all payments, some other way to relieve us. And if there's no other way, pray for your people, because those attorneys that you send on our estates will be the ones to buy them at your prices. Thank you.
Okay, can we give it up for our amazing artists? Fabulous. Thanks to everybody again for coming tonight. We really hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We have a couple other events coming up in May if you'd like to join us again. Perhaps most importantly, this was a prequel event to another event that's going to be held on May 23rd called Your Voice in This House. What we want you to do is come back and think about how to start or restart your civic journey by hearing about the inspiring stories of activists, historians, and elected officials who overcame their own self-doubt early on in their careers and defined themselves as civic change agents at the state, local, and national levels. We hope that this experience today, listening to the petitions of people from the 17th and 18th centuries, will inspire you to see yourselves as a powerful civic agent and see there's many ways to express civic agency. Also, later on this week, on Wednesday, we're going to be doing another performance or another event called Coercion, Conflict, and Consensus to mark the 250th anniversary of the Coercive Acts. We're going to play Revolution is Brewing, our award-winning immersive role-playing game that focuses on the debates that took place around the time of the acts, and it'll follow with a panel discussion. And spoiler alert, some of your fellow players will include historians and elected officials. If you haven't been to our sites inside Old State and Old South, please come back for a visit during the day to meet our fantastic interpretive staff and explore the sites in greater depth. We have 2 special exhibits up right now: Impassioned Destruction, that explores the role of property destruction as a means of protest in American history, and Humble Petitioner, which will give you a deeper dive into how disenfranchised people of all backgrounds used petitions in the 18th century to have their voices heard. To learn more, please follow us at social media at RevSpaces, sign up for our newsletter, or visit the website at www.revolutionaryspaces.org. Thanks again to the Lowell Institute and the National Park Service for supporting this event. And if you haven't already, consider becoming a member of RevSpaces. Thanks again for coming, and have a wonderful evening. Safari is going to bring us out with another amazing performance, so we hope you stick around to enjoy that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.